As we all suspected, the 2.7 patch, which is tied to Season 4, is pretty bare bones to avoid overshadowing Blizzard's upcoming release of Diablo 4, as well as the server slam that is happening for it soon. That said, let's look at the good and bad of it, since there are some things I think they are doing right with this patch, and I do understand why it's bare bones from a business perspective. Though oddly, I think online changes are the best improvements of the patch, but we'll start with the mechanics first. The first one you probably already know about, albeit due to a somewhat shady practice on Blizzard's part, but that is the next hit delay chance. In simple terms, it's doing with next hit delay what they actually did with casting delays previously, and that's simply decoupling them from each other so that a twister's next hit delay will not impact a multi-shot's next hit delay. This is not as major of a change as you'd think for most builds, especially if playing solo, with the exception of the Assassin and to a lesser extent the Druid. For the Assassin, this means that stacking multiple charges will be more powerful now, since they no longer interfere with each other, which is another Mosaic buff, and frankly I don't see Mosaic going anywhere despite the fact that it is an awful designed weapon from balancing perspectives, especially moving forward. This is because it places martial arts charges in a place where they have to balance around an item, which in turn will toggle that item between being necessary and obsolescence based on the balance changes. The Druid's impact is far less drastic, since you will be pretty much seeing a minor impact for Wind Druids who run Quick Cast, Twister, and Tornado, as well as for Fire Druids that use Volcano and Fissure. But these will be minor improvements, with the decoupling of casting delays still being far more important for the Fire Druid, and the Twister Tornado Quick Cast being the exception, not the rule, and not actually creating a drastic damage amplification. Other than that, the only other extremely important change is that traps have now been fixed for the Assassin, benefiting both from +% to elemental damage modifiers as well as finally getting the minus enemy resistance effect on traps offline, which they never patched in until now, since previously it had only worked online. So what that basically means is the Assassin is now in the top tiers of both melee and range combat thanks to these changes. And while not number one in either, it's definitely encroaching on the levels of the Paladin in terms of being able to set up to be busted power-wise. Though the Assassin is the safer hardcore option for ranged of the two at least, but the less safe of the two for melee options is the Assassin as well, so they kind of trade off there. But they are trading blow for blow in endgame gear regardless. The Sorceress, of course, still wins as farmer to get that gear though. The rest of the changes are fairly minor, such as the utility fix that removes knockback from one of the Bulkathos swords, which makes it better, and I'm happy to see it because sets need a lot of improvement. And despite the weight being placed on it, the direct shift between wear forms for the Druid is a relatively minor one. It makes the setup for Metamorphosis less clunky now, but it's still absolutely clunky as hell, and probably will be unless they go full bore into shifting the Druid towards the Diablo 4 style and make the actual attack skills auto-shift for him, but I don't see that happening. Beyond that, it's just bug fixes in terms of the mechanical operation of the game, but since I've ragged on them a bit up to this point for the lackluster patch, I do want to point out something I think is actually a good change, and I hope they continue doing it with each season, even though it doesn't really benefit me personally. And that is that they're adding character slots for your online account. In this case, 4, which is more than enough for one season of play, and I hope they do continue doing that with each season going forward, even though I usually dump my stuff off and delete the characters after each season. Some other ladder changes that they are doing now are returning your skill resets the first time you play a previous ladder character on non-ladder, though it's not really retroactive unless you have not logged into a game on your Season 1 or Season 2 characters sitting in your account, since it sounds like it's a ladder character flag that gets flipped whenever you join a non-ladder game, and it cannot be undone. And while they say they've put in an anti-spam system in place, I just logged in right after the patch to dump all my stuff for postseason cleanup, and the bots are in full force spamming RMT sites and scams, so I don't think those systems are working particularly well. Now for those of you here just for the patch updates, that's about it, but I know some people will have been biting at what I mentioned earlier with shady business practices. You might be thinking, but they're just sharing patch details to give people a taste of what's to come, and they've done this before with Runewords, and I've called them out on it before. But you should always be weary of pre-release information and it being fed to select individuals, and the influence it can have on an attention-driven economy like YouTube and Twitch. All you need to do is look at tech channels outside of English-speaking countries and you'll see what happens. People get blacklisted for saying negative things and will never see a pre-release product, and it hampers their growth. Now, I don't begrudge the channels for doing it since it's what's best for the channel, and heck, I'd probably cover pre-release information if it was given to me too. But I know it can influence you in a number of ways. In my case, it usually makes me hyper aware of the company and more prone to being critical. For most people, it makes them soften their stance for the opportunity for more similar deals, especially if they're sponsored. The shady is entirely on the company's part regardless though, whether intentional or not. This is due to the power dynamic between the creator and the company. All that said, Diablo 2 Resurrected is very much in maintenance mode, and we saw it coming from a mile away. I do hope we still get some new runewords in the future, maybe some balance tweaks, but I'm not sure how much staff they will dedicate to supporting this when they have another game with another battle pass and various other steady updates being more financially incentivized.